All right, guys, welcome back. Welcome back. We have in this next section, section 3, we are going to create our data access layer and inject into our controllers. So you need a DAL, a data access layer. The reason being, you want to make sure you're adhering to best practices when it comes to accessing data. I've found that a lot of times, a lot of the problems I run into are just like, I'm just using like standard DB context um, standardized DB context uh, functionality within Entity Framework and within language integrated queries, which aren't always optimized. Sometimes they are. For small, simple apps, it's good. But for larger apps, you want to create a data access layer and set the rules and standards for accessing that data. And it also shortens up your controllers because a lot of times, if you have the DB context right in the controller, you might need to query the DB context 1 or 2 times or whatever and have a bunch of methods and things like that. Whereas when you have a data access layer, a lot of that logic for managing your data goes into the data access layer, and your controllers become cleaner. Because really, a controller action should just contain logic and methods. It really shouldn't contain a lot of detailed step-by-step stuff for updating fields and stuff like that. We put that in our data access layer, or we put it in our models in some cases, but we don't leave it in our controller because, again, a controller should just be a controller should just be a flow of logic and a response to the user. That's really all we want in our controller. So our data access layer is going to have the following. It's going to have get events, get my events, which will have all the events from you specifically. Get events being every event in the database. Get event, which has we'll just get one event. Create event, which will create an event. Update event, which will update event. Delete event, deletes an event. Then the same thing, get locations, get location, and create location. So basically, this is going to include, this will just include rules. So for example, get locations is going to include your locations. It shouldn't include the locations for other users. And we may need to reference that by updating our models so that a location is assigned to a user as well. But anyways, that might be something we extend from this code in terms of the business rules. We don't necessarily need to do that on the first run here. I just close some of this crap down. But anyways, let's close this down. Let's take a look. Open up our documentation here. And we're going to open up dependency injection for .NET Core. Here we go. Here's the article. Basically, you do this. There's basically 2 steps, and they're both really simple steps. I'll bring them up over here so you can see. So you create your class, and then you create an interface for that class. And then you dependency inject it as such. And then when you dependency inject the interface, it gets everything from the class. Which is weird, but that's just how it works. Don't ask me why it works like that. But this is what is recommended. And then also you have to have this add scoped when you're configuring services, so that .NET Core knows that you added that, right? Because if you don't add the add scoped in your configured services, it goes, hey, what the hell's going on? This isn't, you can't, like, because if you see here, when you do the add scoped, it's referencing the interface, and it's associating it with the dependent class. So it's going to pull from here via here, hence we're injecting the functionality into our code. A little bit more of a stable design pattern than just adding static classes or containers or even private DB contexts or private data access layers into your controller actions. So we'll go ahead and come over here in the data. We're going to right click add, just click new item. And this item is going to be called DAL, short for data access layer. I'm going to click on add. We're going to add the interface up here, interface DAL. And then we need our, so for those of you that don't understand interfaces, what an interface does is it just adds existing functionality onto the class itself. There typically are going to be required methods and classes from the interface, and there's a certain particular way I like to set this up. But yeah, basically we add all our methods here, and then they're required to be added down here if we go like this. See? Go like that. Now, any method that's added up here in this DAL is going to be required in the DAL because we have the interface on top of it. So that's the basics of interfacing in C#. Now let's go back at our presentation and see what the list of methods are. So we've got, I'm going to just bring this over onto my other screen. We've got get events. Let's go public list event get events. Yep. And then you can see here, we've got an error now because you can see now that we have the DAL, because we are adding this interface, it needs that method. Now it can either be, I think it can be overridden, but it needs to be represented in the the interfaced class. So let's go ahead and add all these ones that we listed out. So public list event get my events. And we may or may not end up using all of these, but let's just create them anyways because I think it's a good list. Public, and then this next one is going to return an event. Get event. And you know what we'll have? We'll have an int ID there, right? Because you need an ID for the event because it's going to have a certain ID associated with it. And it's going to be an integer because that's what we defined it as, right? And then public event, public void update event. And here we're going to pass in what's called an iForm collection. Now, what an iForm collection is it's just a snapshot of whatever the form was. Typically, when you, whenever you submit a form, there's a form collection, like a post event or a body on the other side when you use a post or a put, that contains everything you sent over. In ASP.NET, we use the iForm collection to represent this, and it'll basically give you a list of everything that was posted on that form. As soon as the post event occurs, it's going to say, hey, check it out. Here's all this stuff in update event, right? Next up, delete event. This is going to be another void method. Delete event. And we're going to pass the int ID. Next up is locations. Okay, cool. Public list location. Get locations. And then public list, public location, get location. And this one's going to accept an ID for the location. Public void create location. And we'll go, what should we pass into the create location? What do you guys think? We could do an iForm collection. We could do a location itself. Location's a really simple model, so I think we should be safe passing it in. Oh, and finally, we forgot void create event. And this one will pass in the iForm collection. Form. Location. Now you can see we have all these errors now. So we can see that I have a huge list of errors, just ones associated with the interface. The reason why is because, as I was saying before, we got to add all these methods in here. So let's go through and add them. Ta-da! Of course, we can't do that, right? Got to make them actual fully qualified events rather than just framework for each event. Now look at our errors. The errors now have to do with not returning a value, which is what happens when you set a return type and you don't return anything, obviously. Because if I say this is going to return a list of event and we don't return Jack, well, C# is going to get all upset with me. And I mean, duh. So why don't we get started with some of these? We'll go through these one by one and define how these should each look. So we're going to do a private application DB context DB equals new application DB context, like so. Let's see if it likes that. Oh, there's no argument that corresponds to the, so we need a parameter list constructor. So let's add it. So if you didn't understand what that was, basically it's expecting these options to be passed in, but we don't necessarily want to pass them in at runtime. You know, because we might not have them. And it should just go back to the default. So whatever the default connection is for an application DB context as defined in our service layer, our startup.cs file, it should just default to that if we have the parameter list constructor. But if not, we can always deal with that and we can always implement a fix. If it gets the wrong connection string or something like that. So moving on. Public list event, get events. What should this look like? Well, I know we were talking about how it should only be your events, but we'll just have it like this. Return db.events.toList. Like that. And what this is doing is this is grabbing this right here, which is a DB set, and it's returning it as a list, which is a little bit cleaner. We can do more with a list than we can with a DB set or an array. Lists have everything in it, including the IEnumerable, iQueryable. Well, actually, I think it's just the IEnumerable. But we have all those interfaces added on, and we can use our link queries. So we can use like .where, .any, .take1, .takeall, .select, all those link queries, right? We can take those and we can just put them in there. We can get to work. So that just returns all the events in our database to a list. What's next? Get my events. Oh, okay, here we go. Yeah, so we're going to need to do something a little different here. We're going to update this so that it contains int user ID, right? And the reason why is because we want to know what the user ID is at runtime. Because we're going to need to know who's accessing these. So we can grab the user ID in our controller actions if we have a user manager instance dependency injected into that controller action. And then we can pass the user ID into this and get the values that we want. So, we're going to do return db.events.where. Here goes our lambda. X goes into x.user.id equals user ID. .toList. See, it doesn't like that. Does it like that? No, it doesn't, because by default in ASP.NET, the user ID is a string, right? You see that? It's what's called a GUID, which is like some really complex, crazy string that has all the values that you need. But yeah, that looks great. That looks amazing. So that one looks good. That's going to do get my events. Next is get my event. This one's really easy. Return db.events.first or default. Add our lambda. X goes into x.id equals id. That's real simple, right? And if you don't know first or default, basically, it basically takes the first result that matches that condition or the default. The default is null. So if it can't find anything, it's going to return null. And we can handle that later in our controller action, which is what the controller actions are actually for. They're for handling like not found, null, bad requests, stuff like that. That's what you use your controllers for. But as far as accessing data, we create the rules for accessing our data here. That's where we create it, right? All right, next up, create event. We're using an iForm collection. This one's going to be really simple, guys, but it's going to kind of look a little advanced. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to look up, let's see what we had in event. If we bring our presentation back over here, we can see we have all these fields. If we're just doing the iForm collection, what we can do is we can take string values from the iForm collection and then either parse them, convert them, or use them as a lookup, right? Use them as a lookup in our DB context to assign all the values correctly. So we can create our event equals new event, and then you can either use the, oh shoot, you can't use this word. Sorry, that's a disallowed term. Gotta be very careful. There's some disallowed terms in C#. Event, I believe, is one of them. So you can use the object initializer, or you can just go line by line. It's going to have the same effect. Dot ID equals form ID. But here's the thing. Parse form ID. Oops. We're not doing comparison. What am I doing? So let me explain to you what this is doing, okay? This iForm collection, it contains a collection of it contains a collection of strings. Strings within a database, within a dictionary of strings. Is kind of what it looks like. So we can access the ID by using form ID, but the default is going to be string, right? We can't use a string here. We need an integer. So again, this might break later, but we'll write it out as best we can for each of these. Do name equals form name new event dot description equals form description new event dot, what's next? Start time. Now here's where it's going to get tricky, guys, right? We need to convert a string date value to our date time value. Now what does that look like? Well, if we go over here to good old Stack Overflow, we can see this article right here. We can see that this is what we need to do if we have a date string, and we want to change it into a date time. Because remember, date time is the C# object that contains those values. But when we're looking at a form collection, an iForm collection, we're looking at string values. So why don't we grab this Well, no. Let's do just datetime.parse. That looks really good. And there's also some good documentation over here at Microsoft. Yeah. Yep. Yeah, this should work. It looks like it's intuitive enough to figure it out. Well, datetime.parse form. We have to add the exact name of the field because it's going to infer that from .NET Core and Razor. And we'll copy this because we can just use this again for the end time. So we'll copy paste here and we'll go end time and do the same thing. End time. Gotta make sure this is the right name. Always check to make sure everything's named correctly. And then what's last? We'll look into our DB context for this. So let me explain to you what this line of code is doing. We're basically taking the form location from the iForm collection and we're adding it where we're saving it as the location. And again, guys, this is going to make a lot more sense later once we have all this stuff set up, but I'm a big fan of setting up the back end before you set up the front end. So you set up your rules for accessing data, you set up your dependency injection, you set up your DB context and your various different ingredients here. And then once this is all set up, we can just use it in a much cleaner, much neater format. All right, so that looks good. The last thing we need to do is go to db.events.add new event and db.save changes. Yeah, that looks fantastic. That looks fantastic. That looks amazing. Okay, cool. So that now on to update. So update and create are basically the exact same thing, right? Basically the exact same thing. And also we could add this to our, we can refactor this so that this is added to the event itself. So let's go ahead and do a quick refactor here. Let's add our constructor, public event. We'll do like that. And then what we're going to do is we're going to take all this stuff. We're going to go over here and paste this. We're going to move each of these so that it updates the existing event that we just created in memory. So now we're leveraging the constructor, but we're going to need a no, that should be good. We're going to leverage the constructor in such a way that it that this is all inferred. And we'll add a parameter list constructor just because that sometimes helps entity framework from breaking. Parameter list constructors are good, guys. It's because sometimes if you have nothing but parameterized constructors, no parameter list constructor can sometimes cause errors. So we'll grab this and then watch what we're going to do. We're going to do this same exact line of code that we had here, but like this and like that. And then we can remove all this because this now exists within our constructor. As such, remove this here, And now we've refactored it in such a way that I think it's cleaner. I think it looks better that way, and then we can just construct our event and go from there. But this is the same as the code that you saw here before. We're not doing as much property assigning within our data access layer. Data access layer should mostly be about rules with regards to accessing data and how they're updated. We can put a lot of the stuff with assigning stuff within our within our classes themselves, within our models. And then we're also going to add another one here: public void update event, and we'll do the same thing. We'll just do the same thing, the same exact thing, right? Except instead of being constructor, we're just saying, okay, cool, this is what we do when we update the event. We just change these fields, right? So when we come down here, we're going to do this same thing we did up here, but we're going to do it on an existing event, because updating is just changing what's existing. Okay, I changed the time of the start event, I changed the whatever, I changed the location, I changed the name, the description, whatever I changed. So we need to have that be respected in our data access layer. So the first thing we do to access things is we grab that DB context. So we go var you can't use the word event in C#. Var my event equals db dot events dot first or default goes into x dot id equals int dot parse form id. Well, let me explain what this line of code is going to do. We're getting the form collection ID, and then we're parsing it with our int.parse, right? So int.parse is going to take it, and in some cases we would use try parse, because try parse will not give you an error if it can't parse, and that's fine. But in this case, we're going to take int.parse because we're pretty confident it's going to parse if we've made it this deep into our data access layer, because it shouldn't be updating it if we can't find it. So we're going to use the iForm collection and grab the ID. Now what this is this is an entity. Now with this my event thing is it's actually something that's in the database. So we can change properties for it. Event dot var. Let's grab the location first. Equals db dot locations dot first or default. X goes into x dot location. X dot name equals form location. And this again will make a little bit more sense when we start adding the raise review component into this. So just follow along. If you don't really know what we're doing, trust me, it will make more sense. I've done this a million times. This is going to take the iForm collection location field and find a location, because remember, if we change the event, we could potentially change the location. It was originally in conference room 2, now it's in conference room 4, whatever the case may be. So we got to think far down along the line in terms of what we're doing, and plan for changes rather than just accepting the code as it is. So that's the next step that we have. Okay, what's next? Well, we added the update event form. We added the update event. What do you call it? We added the update event method to our event model. So let's just go my event dot update event, or we could have just called it update, but we'll keep update event. Form location. Nice. So then we have to mark this as changed. Oh God, I always forget how to do this. Am I doing this right? State equals use state dot modified. Okay, there we go. I guess we can delete this since it's inferred. The next thing we have to do is we have to mark it as changed. So Entity Framework only knows something's changed if we mark it as changed. Otherwise, it doesn't know what's going on. So whenever we modify things, we want to mark them as changed. Then we go db.save changes or save changes async, depending on your preference. I don't really care because we're deep into the, there's no render blocking here, so we don't have to worry about it. And we're only updating one record. So db save changes. Yeah, that's what it looks like. This line's important. This line's important. That's it. That's it for update event. Now we've got delete event. This one should be pretty easy. Let me show how this works. Assuming you want to actually delete. Sometimes you don't necessarily want to actually delete something. You want to mark it as deleted and then delete it like 30 or 60 days later, because sometimes people delete things and they go, "Oh no, I deleted my thing. Can you guys in tech support restore it?" And then we get it's like, no, you deleted it. It's gone. We'll do it the final way. We'll just remove it. Equals db.events.first or default, which is our basic search syntax. X dot, or we can also use find. You guys want to use find? Yeah, let's do find. Let's switch it up a little here. Dot find ID. So this is finds the ID with that primary key value. You can use either or. You can use first or default. You can use find. Use whatever you want. Because it has IEnumerable and IQueryable attributes. So, anyways, we grab the event we want to delete. Then we go db.events.remove my event. I wonder if we could just pass the ID in here too. Let me see if we can do that. No, it doesn't like that. It doesn't like that. Yeah, it doesn't like that. So we'll have to do it with a more fully qualified query. And then as always, db.save changes or save change. Whoop, whoop, whoop. Hit Control A. I highlighted everything. Oh. Save that. All right, what's next, folks? What's next? Next up on our list, get locations. What does get locations look like? Well, really freaking simple. These we're not going to add delete and all that stuff. I'm just showing this to you for reference. Get locations, super simple. Return db.locations.toList. Boom, that's it. That's all we need. Make sense? So we're getting the locations from the DB context, and then we are returning them as a list rather than a DB set, which we don't want. Make sense, everyone? Okay. Get location. We'll use the good old find, since that's, what they like to do. And then, check it out, create location. Yeah. This one isn't using the iForm collection, and there's a very good reason for that. Because the location is simpler. We don't need an iForm collection. If you're going to create a view model and have a lot of custom fields, you're probably going to want to grab the iForm collection because those custom fields are always going to be passed through. So if you grab the iForm collection, you can say, hey, I want this exact field right here per my requirements. And I want to go through and I want to work with it. If you do, if you grab the iForm collection and you, if you have a simpler model that just has like a couple strings and integers and nothing fancy, you can just, you don't need the iForm collection. You just pass in the model itself like we're doing here. So create location. This one's easy. and db.save changes. And since it's void, it doesn't require a return type. Yep. That looks great. That looks really great, guys. This is a good DB context. This is a great framework. What you're looking at here. This is a great framework when you're building out stuff in .NET Core and you're building out your data access layer. This is a good framework. You know, if you guys want to build like full stack applications, full stack web applications or APIs or stuff like that, you know, for mobile apps, and you want to use .NET Core, look at this as a framework, because I'm telling you, I've used this on a bunch of different apps, and it's honestly been helping me a lot, because especially once you get to like 10,000 or 20,000 or 50,000 records or more, you're going to run into situations where it's like you don't want to just use the DB context. You want to set up rules. You want to set up standards for how the data is accessed. You want to act accordingly. If you just, you know, willy-nilly throw your DB context in there and access that, it might really impact your application performance. I don't want that. I want you guys to do things correctly so that your code can actually withstand the test of time. So what's next? Well, let's look over here at our dependency injection article. So in order to dependency inject, we had to add the class itself. If we scroll up here, really the two important steps are usually at the top. Yeah, the two important steps are at the top. We have to do the add scoped with the interface and the class. Then we have to create a private read-only, and then on the constructor, add it like so. So let's do it. Here we go. Yikes. Totally lost my train of thought. Okay. I figure out where I would want to put this. Let's add it right here. So we do services.add scoped. And we add this like so. And what that does is that registers our service. So it recognizes that as a dependency injected service, and it allows you to, you know, utilize that in your code. You know, simple as that. Save this. Now we're going to dependency inject to our home controller. You can see here's the dependency injection design pattern right here. We can see we're doing it with this private read-only logger, because we're actually passing an iLogger, but it's actually getting the logger. If you extended this, you would see the same design pattern. You would see the same things happening here. So we can kind of just imitate what's here. We can go private read-only IDAL. We'll use this format, underscore IDAL. And it doesn't look like it recognizes it. So let's go like that. And then let's add it to the constructor. IDAL. IDAL. And then we assign it here. Like so. And now we've successfully dependency injected our data access layer into our controller. We start accessing it as such. Underscore IDAL dot get event 1. Now let's just run that and see what happens. It should not get an event. It should return null. Either that or it should throw an error. It'll either return null or it'll throw an error, depending on what's going on. So let's go ahead and see what happens. It's not going to pass anything to the view yet, right? Because we're not even working with the views. We haven't even touched the views. Views are for later. Views are for when we really have a good handle on this web application. Yep, see, here we go. No database provider has a configured for this. DB context, provider configured. Or, yep, this is what I was talking about before. Yeah, this is what I was talking about before. So, if you have the parameterless constructor, you can have problems. And here's one way we can fix it. Check it out, y'all. Stack Overflow to the rescue, as always. But this is what I was talking about. When you add the DB context to other places in your application environment, you sometimes get issues. And by sometimes, I mean like a lot of the time. Because what happens is sometimes your options are not configured. And if you use a parameterless constructor, it's not going to know what's what. So this solution you're looking at, this answer, is the one that we're going to use. Because what's happening is this error means there's no database provider, meaning it doesn't have a connection string and it doesn't have a connection to the database. So there's no underlying provider. You just have an empty DB context. So what we're going to do, we're going to go ahead and copy this like a lazy scrub. And we're going to halt this. And we're going to go into our application DB context. I'm going to go here. Oh no. Oh no, what am I doing? I meant to be hit Control Z and I was hitting Control X. What is Control X? Oof, yikes. You don't want Control X, folks. That's not good. But I know for a fact this particular one resolves the issue for me every single time. It's on the on configuring. On configuring. And then we'll set the connection string. So, what do we set it at? Open startup.cs. It's just called default connection. And you guys have to manage these connection strings. Like this is the fast way of doing it. This is the sloppy way of doing it. The proper way of doing it is to save these connection strings in a key vault in Azure and then load them as needed based on what you're doing. So, you know, this is just when we're playing around. Don't do all this all the time because you'll have some problems, right? You'll have some problems. Now, what this is doing, basically what this is saying, okay, if our options are not configured, which is what would happen when we have a parameterless constructor because we're not passing these options in. These are the default options. That's what it's saying. So if we run this, this should load the default connection. And we shouldn't get that error anymore. Although I think it's going to break because I'm reusing the same. I'm reusing the same window. Internet Explorer Express or IIS Express doesn't like that. We need a fresh new window. Fresh new window. Let's see what she does. Hey, look at that. It works. Now this should be empty because again, there's no events in there. So this should be null. But based on this initial test, we know that we have successfully dependency injected our data access layer. We know that it has access to the database, and we know that it's working. We know that it is doing something. So we've successfully created our data access layer, and we've successfully dependency injected it into the constructor, and it has successfully accessed data from the database. What a great lesson. What a great exercise in building these kind of apps. Ow, my mic's all over the place. Sorry about that, guys. I need to get in control of my mic. I need to get in control of my mic over here. What am I doing? Jeez. Start acting like a professional over here. Boom, look at that. The error is gone because we have successfully configured. And see, that's what I was explaining to you guys in the when I added this from that Stack Overflow question. Because again, if you are going to use this parameterless constructor, as we are using in this data access layer, you better be sure you're getting the right connection stream, because otherwise it's going to give you an error. You know, otherwise it's going to give you an error. It's going to say, what the hell are you doing? You know, in fact, this right here, this data access layer, this not data access layer, this DB context, this application DB context, the only thing that's actually using it is going to be the user manager for like sign in and sign out. Everything else is going to be the database, the DB context that we pass into our DAL. And there are good reasons for that. Because again, we're setting up best practices for accessing data. So we may need to access a separate database, or sorry, a separate DB context. So just something to keep in mind. I don't know. This is just my process. So anyways, enough rambling. That's enough for this section. This has been a long video. We're gonna go ahead and version and wrap it up. We're gonna head on to the next section. We got our DAL here. We added the constructors. So let's write this one up. Add DAL and constructors. And update methods for events and locations. Dependency inject DAL into home controller. Yeah, that looks great. So let's go commit. And let's push that right straight to master, because nobody's here to yell at me because I'm not at work right now. So ain't nobody yelling at me. So let's take a look at what we got in the good old GitHub here. Alrighty, folks, what do we got here? Oh, look at this. This is fantastic. 19 seconds ago. Looks great. Project's coming along. All right. That's it for this section. I'll see you guys over here in the next section.